Oh, okay. Okay, so, Shabbat Tov. Welcome back, Kodesh Tov. Welcome back, everybody. We are an extended hiatus back, resuming the Tzurba Rabbanan Shir. Good to be back with everybody in person and on Zoom. Learning to write together once again. Just by an introduction, I'll just mention tonight, as you all know, is Yom HaZikaron. There will be a tekes here this evening after marriage, just to remind everybody about that. But this is the volume 17, which we're currently studying. You'll see on the front that this is the Perez family volume. This volume was sponsored in honor of the John and Shelley Perez. At the time, their son was believed to be held hostage. Unfortunately, since the publication has come out, we have learned tragically that he was killed on battles on Simchat Torah itself on October 7th. Really a heroic story of what his tank, he and his tank members were able to do. They saved countless lives, you may never know how many. But this volume is dedicated to his memory. Now, learning today should be the Elohim Shmatot, together with all of the fallen and all of the killed in this period. Which I just mentioned as well. This is, if anybody, I wasn't asked to say it, I'll just say very briefly, and then we'll move on. If anybody's interested in naming rights in the next volume, there are sponsorship opportunities available. So please speak to me after that is of interest. Okay. Page 103. So we have been discussing the laws related to the mitzvot asay of Shabbat. So we've gone through Hadlakat Nerot, we've gone through Kiddush. We're now about to get to the meals of Shabbat. And we'll maybe zoom out first a little bit, talk about the concept of Oneg Shabbat in general. We've been discussing that there are two concepts which are maybe somewhat related, somewhat distinct. There's Kavod Shabbat and Oneg Shabbat. If you have a look at source number 1, so on page 105, source number 1, the Rambam in Hilchot Shabbat, he tells us, you'll notice, by the way, this is right at the end, this is already Perek Lamed of Hilchot Shabbat. The reason for that is the Rambam structures at the beginning, the first 2 prakim, he lays out some of the principles, but he essentially divides his Hilchot Shabbat through the mitzvot, going through first those things which are the Oraita, afterwards going through those things which are the Rabbanan. Right, so we get to near the end of the Hilchot, and says the Rambam as follows. Source number 1. There are 4 things which are said about Shabbat, 4 concepts, so to speak. We have 2 which are Midoraita and 2 which are Midorabanan. Then before Ashina at the end of the year, these 2 ideas which are not Midoraita, are probably very supreme for our sages, and are explicit in the word of the Nabi. So Shabbat Torah, Zachol v'Shamor. But everybody knows we have Zachol v'Shamor. We've discussed in the past. We have 2 candles, one connected to Zachol, one connected to Shamor. Zachol v'Shamor b'dibur echad, right in the Aseret HaDibrot. Zachol, generally speaking, refers to remembering Shabbat, i.e. the positive actions which we are required to take. That's what we've been discussing in Yishurim. We'll get to Shamor as well. Don't worry, we'll get that. But Shamor is more the negative, right, what we need to refrain from doing. Then at the end, Kavod v'Oneg, the 2 concepts which we find. And then at the end, this is explicit in Sefer Yeshayahu, we talk about Kavod, which we'll translate as, I suppose, honor, and Oneg, which is a pleasure or joy, delight of Shabbat. Right? Now, you'll see in footnote number 1, I think we've mentioned this previously as well. The Vilna Gaon differentiated between Kavod Shabbat and Oneg Shabbat, in the sense that Kavod would be that which you do before Shabbat in preparation for the honor of Shabbat, and Oneg Shabbat would be that which you do on Shabbat itself. So in that sense, setting up the candles, maybe lighting candles beforehand would be Kavod Shabbat, and sitting for the actual Shabbat meal by the light of the candles, that would be fulfillment of Oneg Shabbat. That was the Vilna Gaon. Others do not find such a clear distinction, like Kavod Shabbat, Oneg Shabbat, somewhat interchangeable, but these are the two concepts. You can see in source number 2, in the Navi himself, Sefer Yeshayahu, and these psukim may be somewhat familiar because they are said at the beginning of Kiddush. Kiddush of Shabbat morning, Toshif Shabbat Aglecha, Sot Kamtech Av Yom Kodeshi, Vekarata Shabbat Oneg, Vitosh Hashem Mechubad, Chibato Mechsot Rachecha, Mitzot Cheshacha, Velaver Davar. Now many halachot that we learned in these short psukim, but the whole concept of the way you speak on Shabbat is not the way you speak on a weekday. The way you walk on Shabbat is not the way you walk on a weekday. And obviously the entire concept of Oneg and of Kavod, right over the page, it continues, says, As Titaneg Hashem, the Kaptiram of the Eretz, So great promises are given for those who will fulfill this mitzvah of Oneg Shabbat. So one practical application that comes out of this, as we said, Oneg, delight, enjoyment, is going to be related to food. Right? So that is one. There are other expressions as well. We'll get to those, but we want to focus on our food first. So it says the Gemara, Shabbat, source number 3. It says, with what do we have the Oneg Shabbat? Rav Yehuda, brother of Shmuel, Barshilat, which made of Avamano, but Tafshil Shel Toradim, V'dagim Gdolim, V'oshei Shomim, with a dish of beets and large fish and heads of garlic. Okay, if that works for you, right? That's but that was a delicacy in that time. And the point is, it's a special food which people would enjoy. Obviously, there's enough coming in here. Again, this is not in the sense that we'll see specifically one of the things that comes up is fish. For whatever reason, fish was, I guess, a delicacy in Bava. And it says in the Poskim, a person needs to eat fish on Shabbat. What if you don't like fish? You see, it's not on Shabbat to eat fish if you don't like fish. Like, there are people there's fish. Eat the fish? Yeah, no, that's not what it means. It's a food that is a choice food that one enjoys. It's very interesting. I don't know if we'll have time to discuss it, but often, we spoke before Purim and on different occasions. So we talked about the Gemara says, generally speaking, meat we associate as being simple. That's true with Yom Tov, and there is a machloket in the Pashim whether the meat that's spoken about there relates only to the Basar of Korbanot or relates to just eating meat in general. That is when it comes to Yom Tov, the special idea of that. But when it comes to Shabbat as well, it's Oneg. So therefore, is one required to eat meat? What if a person doesn't like meat? What if a person is a vegetarian? So then having a milky meal or delicacy, there's again, if that's what a person prefers, so then there's nothing wrong with that. But we'll get into maybe we'll get into more details later. The point is, Oneg Shabbat is special foods that one would not necessarily normally have, but something in honor of Shabbat. The Gemara continues as Amar Papa Kasa B'Hausim. This is small fried fish, meaning even if it's not something large and grand, it's something special that is the honor of Shabbat. Okay. So one of the most clearly defined forms of Oneg Shabbat is going to be the fact that we have 3 meals. Again, in the days of, maybe there's a bit of background to this, in the days of the Gemara, generally speaking, people would eat 2 meals. There was an evening meal and there was a daytime. So those were 2 meals. At Shabbat, we're going to see that we have 3, and that is going to be the extra on. Yeah. That is mentioned as well. That is also, definitely. In terms of one's clothing, that is also part of the idea of, again, based on the distinction of the grab, what we said, probably fit into what Shabbat maybe prepared before. But yeah, definitely it says that one should, again, in the days of the Gemara, people had maybe 1 garment or 2 garments, and that was it. They didn't wash their clothes every day. Thankfully, as I've mentioned many times, hygiene has moved on in the last few thousand years. But so it's brought down that one has to have a freshly laundered item of clothing for Shabbat. It's not something they did every day. Thankfully, nowadays we do. But yes, definitely there is a concept of clothing should be special for Shabbat.
So now we have
okay, so we'll get to that. Let's look at the source. Again, your question is, does the fact that we have 3 meals mean because we have to have extra on what we normally have, or is there something intrinsic in the number 3? So let's have a look. Let's look at the parameters. Page 107. The Gemara here on Masechet Shabbat says as follows: Then Rabbanan, how many meals does the person need to eat on Shabbat? And it will surprise you. It will shock all of you. You know, the answer is machloket. There is a disagreement as to how many meals one is actually required to eat. Shalosh, says the Gemara, we eat 3. The Hilchot says no, you need to have 4.
And 4.
What?
And 4.
And 4. Right. By the way, when we're talking about here, we're talking about Shabbat. So we mean Shabbat from Friday night through to Shabbat day. We're not just talking about Shabbat day. The night is included in it. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, V'shnei mikra echad darshu, something we find in a number of places, 2 different opinions, although both learned from the same pasuk, but they learned it differently from the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Vayomer Moshe, ichlu." This is relating to the man, of course. Ichluhu hayom, ki Shabbat hayom, Lashem, Hayom, Lo Timtzu Basareh. What do you notice about that pasuk? The word Hayom is mentioned 3 times. So Rabbi Kenigsberg Tzurba, Vavanan Savli Babedu. Exactly what I said beforehand. When we say Hayom, so 3 times in the context of the man, the word today is mentioned. The word today is mentioned 3 times. So you need to eat 3 times today. Does that mean 3 times during the day? That's what we can understand. And obviously there's a meal at night as well, because or do we say no? Hayom relates not to the daytime hours, but Hayom relates to the day of Shabbat, which includes the night. Therefore, either 3 or 4. Generally speaking, Shulchan Aruch is going to basket, and we need 3 meals. It will be a relief for everybody to get. The question that we always ask, and particularly with the source for the fact of how many meals we have, is from a pasuk. So then when one eats these meals, is this a fulfillment of a mitzvah deoraita? Is this a biblical obligation, or is it a rabbinic obligation? As we know, we've said many times, one is required to keep the rabbanan, just as one is required to keep the deoraitas, but they have different parameters, they have different criteria, cases of doubt, cases of suffix, etc. So Sefer Yereim, Rabbi Eliezer Memitz, one of the Rishonim, he wrote Sefer Yereim, which is one of the Sifrei of Monei HaMitzvot. We have many different Sfarim of the Rishonim going through all these 613 mitzvot. Right? The Gemara tells us that there are 613 mitzvot, doesn't tell us what they are, and therefore you have the Rambam, the Ratzir Sefer Mitzvot, and you have the Sefer Chinuch, and you have Rabbi Eliezer Memitz, and many different books, counting each in their own way what is included within the Torah. So Sefer Yereim says, Shalosh Sudot, Tzivah Yotzreinu B'Parashat Vahi B'Shalach, She'ochlu B'nei Yisrael Gimel Sudot B'Shabbat. The Torah commanded us that we have 3 meals in Shabbat. K'tivachlu Hayom. And B'chol Milei Nanafu Kirei Chavatu B'Sudot B'Shabbat K'ivin Hema. He then says that what is a meal? A meal is considered bread, right? If you don't have bread, that's not considered a meal. Because something I've always wanted to say, and over the page he says, Tama, he actually proves it from the psukim that it's related to bread. Okay, but what we see from here, Sefer Yereim understands this is a mitzvah d'oraita, a biblical mitzvah to eat bread at the 3 meals. But obviously going to be enough coming up for Sudash Lishit. I don't think we'll get there today, and we'll get there next week. But in terms of what are the parameters for Sudash Lishit, just say now, everybody agrees, certainly, the first 2 meals of Shabbat, barring extenuating and exceptional circumstances, one certainly needs to wash and certainly needs to eat bread. You see Sudash Lishit as well, if that's the case. But according to the Re'em, that it is a mitzvah d'oraita, so that makes it much more, a much stronger field. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan in source number 6, he says a little bit differently. He says, "Alavush katav semina Torah k'ketiv plat hayom ayen sham." So he says the Lavush says right also that it's from the Torah. V'im efshar she'enan mamash min haTorah mikol makom v'day mitakanat Moshe Rabbeinu hem sheken kibel miSinai. Okay, so maybe it's a sort of a halakha Moshe miSinai. It's something. But there are many levels, by the way, between the Oraita and the Rabbanan. Normally, that's the distinction. But that's the vice to show once when he spoke about, I think, 13 different definitions in between the Oraita and Rabbanan, Divrei Sofrim, Divrei Kabbalah, different ways of saying things out. So it said Aruch HaShulchan, maybe it's not quite a mitzvah d'oraita, but it is a Mitakanat Moshe Rabbeinu, it's given at Sinai. Okay, again, still a high level field. The Kolbo, source number 7, is another one of the Rishonim. Says, no, this is a din d'Rabbanan, right? Again, we said the whole concept of kavod and oneg Shabbat. Hard to say that is the oraita, but it's in the Navi, but it may be the Rambam said it may be Divrei Sofrim, right? So he says, but if you have a pasuk, it's an asmachta ba'alma, we find it in many places, and therefore he understands this is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. So there is a level of disagreement regarding that question, but everybody agrees that one is obligated in eating these 3 meals. So it says the Rambam in source number 8, top of page 109. The person is obligated to eat 3 meals on Shabbat. Okay, it doesn't mean you need to eat when you're done, but it means you need one at night, one in the morning, and one again in the afternoon. Also, morning doesn't necessarily mean morning. We'll talk a little bit about the timing of the meal, when it needs to be. Just need to be careful with these three meals, not to eat less. I don't say, I'm just going to have two meals or whatever. By the way, I mentioned before, if you want another proof that you're meant to live in Eretz Yisrael, at least you need another proof. At least you're not, so we can talk about it. But so there are places in the world where you go, and particularly in the winter, when it gets, I remember when we were in London, so you get up in the winter. So Shabbat is out by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And it comes in at 3 on a Friday afternoon. So you get up. So davening doesn't start until, I don't know, 9:30. Yeah, Shabbat starts at 9:30. That's the regular one. So by the time davening's finished, it's maybe 12:30. You've got the kiddush, everybody's smooth, whatever it is. You get home. You don't start having lunch and making kiddush, having lunch 1:30, 2 o'clock. We'll talk about if that's acceptable or not. And by the time you finish, you've got to rush off. You've got to finish your meal early, halfway before dessert, and then so you can get back to for mincha, and then mincha. So that's shit. It doesn't even come into it. So no, that's not the way it's meant to be. You need to have, tells us the Rambam, you need to have these three meals. You need to have time for 2 meals in a day. That's why.
But it sounds like 3 meals a day was the norm throughout the week.
No. 2 meals a day. I mean, a daytime meal and a nighttime meal. That was the norm. And on Shabbat there's an additional. What we had, there was it's an Ashur Nanda, and I have mentioned this before. So there would be a kiddush every week, and what we would do in the winter was we would have the rolls, so people could wash and people could make a matzi after kiddush, because otherwise it's impossible to have 2 batches of kiddush. There's no time. So says the Rambam, you need to have your 3 meals with the hair, Hilchot men klam. ואפילו אני המתפרנס מן הצדקה, שואל 3 סעודות. You have people who can't, Hashem, nowadays we live in a time of shefa. For most people, they used to have a basic meal. It's not going to be a problem. It's not going to break the bank. But says Rambam, even in Ani mitpanesh min tzedakah, so we need to make sure that those people have enough for 3 meals as well. ואם היה חולה מרוב האכילה, that never happens. או שהיה מתענה תמיד, פטור מ3 סעודות. Okay, a person for whom eating this much is going to make them sick, overeating, or they're constantly fasting, not so relevant now, but they would be, so there are exemptions. And then says the Rambam something very interesting, which does not appear in the other posting, but he says, according to the Rambam, each one of the 3 meals has to be with wine. But if so, right, you have 2 loaves, and he says the same thing on Yomim Tovim. Okay, so 2 very, very interesting points there. It sounds like, according to the Rambam, that on Yom Tov you also have an obligation of Sudat Rishit. We do not pass in that way. But he also implies, well, don't just imply, he says explicitly, that one needs to have wine with each of the 3 meals on Shabbat. Now, what does he mean when he says you need wine? Does the Rambam mean to say that you have to have Kiddush? Or does he mean, as part of Oneg Shabbat, you serve wine together with the meal? Either way, so certainly the nighttime meal, the morning meal, or lunch, right, we have Kiddush, so we have wine at the meal anyway. So that's the shit, generally speaking, we don't. There are those who follow the Rambam, and we'll make sure and wine has some shit as well. Now, Piskei Teshuvot, source number 9, he explains one interpretation. שזה העיקר הכוונה כדי לכבד ולענג את השבת כמו שנוהגים בסעודות חשובות להתכבד בבשר ויין. There are those who understand from the Rambam that there is an obligation of Kiddush at each of the 3 Shabbat meals. Piskei Teshuvot does not follow that interpretation. He says, no, it means that you honor a meal, you have an important drink, and that is the way to give the meal significance. So just like you have fine food and meat, you have wine as well. לכן דווקא כשמתענג בזה ונהנה בכך, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, if you enjoy it, and if this is going to give you on it, במקומות שמורגלים בכך, in a place where that is normal. So in places, in the custom, seemingly in the Rambam's local, that was what they did. They would open a bottle of wine and open a. Some places nowadays they don't do that, and therefore it seems very strange, not required. But and that's what he says. You can have other drinks that you enjoy and serve. That is all part of under the parameter of Oneg Shabbat. Okay. Next question you can see at the bottom of page 109, is when. When should one eat the Shabbat meal? Is there a time limit on this? So over the page, Tosfot tells us, בקידוש הלאחרון נגזתו, מה שלא היה מקפיד על סעודת שבת, שלא לאכול בלא נגד, לדבר בחוץ. Without getting into the, Tosfot is discussing a certain situation over there, but what's relevant for our purposes is this. He says, in other words, if a person missed the nighttime meal, just like it's maybe somewhat parallel to davening, right? If a person missed a certain missed shachrit for whatever reason, which is beyond his control, so then he would have the opportunity to do tashlumin, then you daven mincha twice. He says also, if you miss the nighttime meal, you can have an extra meal during the day, and that would make up for it. That would satisfy the requirement of shalosh suda. Again, something which under normal circumstances is not so common. But we think now, again, all these halachot that we're learning, we think about the Chayalim, we think about our soldiers in Gaza, and it's not inconceivable. The person would be on, throughout Friday night, would be in a situation, and would then be able to make up the meal the next day. You might say, what am I talking about? The soldiers are out there fighting, is that really what they care about? But you should see some of the questions that have come up over Rimon, I've mentioned before, but Rimon has got a WhatsApp group where he has about 30 WhatsApp groups. But he has a one diamond with different questions come in from different people, he has specifically for Chayalim, and for Banim, etc. And he's been sharing some of the questions that he's received throughout the war. Professor Steinberg spoke about it when he was here as well. Some of the things, it's unbelievable. We spoke on Shabbat about the soldiers, we spoke about the Gvura, physically, the simple, the courage and the bravery and things, but even that within, in the midst of war, questions that come in from Kohanim about taking off their shoes to look at Kohanim or not, or things about their hands are dirty because in the midst of war, can they go and daven and they can't do Netilat Yadayim? All these questions come up. These soldiers, they are so dedicated and so committed, and they're really heroes in so many ways. But they think about these things as well. So if there's an opportunity, that is one way one could fulfill the Shalosh Sudot of Shabbat, according to Tosfot, missed it at night. One could make it up during the day. Okay. For the rest of us that are back here on the home front, we should try and have our meal at night and then not have to rely on this. Now, when is the proper time for having the daytime meals? So we find a number of sources that tell us that the morning meal should be in the morning, it should be before midday. These ones should start before midday. Okay. Again, in Chutzlaretz, like I said, it gets a lot trickier. Right now, Hatzot Hayom is at about 12:30, more or less. Therefore, it's not such a problem to begin before then. Two different reasons are brought as to why it is that one should start at that time. The first one you'll see Aruch HaShulchan, source number 11. He says, it needs to be before midday. So like Sudash Mishit needs to be in the afternoon, after Chatzor. That is brought down, as we will see later on, the parameters of Sudash Mishit specifically. He says, it says the word Hayom 3 times in the Pasuk, that's where we derive it from. In other words, the day is split up into 3 different units. There are 3 different parts of the day of Shabbat. There is the night, there is the morning, there is the afternoon. And each Shabbat has got its own time, and that is when it has to finish. At least one should begin the meal before midday. He says, and that is what I do. That was the practice of the Aruch HaShulchan. Shut Oret Zion, Rabbi Zion HaRashul, he also says, that needs to be at least the Katrila, right, before midday. So that is one understanding, that each one has its set time, it divides the day into 3 sections, and that is it. There is another understanding as to why it should be before Chatzot. It's not necessarily related to that, but we're going to see that there is a prohibition to fast on Shabbat. Right nowadays, we don't, generally speaking, take on voluntary fasts more than we need to. But once upon a time, it was a little more common. People would fast, Tanit Halal, all sorts of reasons why one may fast. And Shabbat, one is not allowed to fast. Now, fasting does not just mean the entire day, but fasting until Chatzot, it is also considered someone on the fast, and one is not meant to do that on Shabbat. If that's the reason, so if somebody had a kiddush or eaten something before, so then we wouldn't be as concerned if the actual meal started a little bit later. Right? That's what the Pri Megadim says here in source number 13. He is saying, immediately according to Tfilat Musaf, if you've eaten something before Musaf, maybe you had a kiddush or you had something before you came to shul, to be Shemana Weish by that, that you think before it comes to shul, it raises the third issue, but we won't get into that now. In such a case, one could then eat a little bit later. So this may be also a reason, a halachic reason why it's necessary to have a kiddush at shul after davening. So maybe that adds to that. I'll just say as well, where do we see the concept of fasting? Part of the day is considered a fast as well. So, for example, it's brought down. Like I said, we don't really add on extra fast nowadays, but there are certain days, even now, it's brought down Erev Rosh Hashanah, for example. Many pious people have the custom to fast on Erev Rosh Hashanah, so as to feel the Emakadin. Rav Nevinsar and Yeshiva Yisrael has written that one could fulfill this and fast until Chatzot. That is practically right. But one is permitted, even like a killer, to take on discussion fast just until Chatzot, part of the day. That's related to Erev Rosh Hashanah. Obviously, the fast days that we have, before the Tanya of the Churban, Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av, etc., that is not, that's the full day. So I'm not giving you any kind of thought of it. Okay. Another point which we saw this in the Uraim and others as well, is that there is a requirement to eat bread. Specifically, it's not called a meal if there is no bread. We discussed this 2 weeks ago in the context of Purim. Purim, when it's not clear what is the nature of the Seudah, you remember, is one required to eat bread there or not? But Shabbat and Yom Tov, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Seudah, there has to be bread. So Shulchan Aruch, source number 14, is 112. Seudah zor v'shel shachrit efshar la'asotah v'lo pan. This Seudah, here he's talking about the nighttime Seudah and the morning Seudah. One has to have bread. Notice there he doesn't mention Seudah Shlishit. We'll talk about Seudah Shlishit more in detail, but there he doesn't say that Seudah Shlishit means bread. Nonetheless, source number 15, he says, there one has to be careful with Seudah Shlishit, but the implication there is that one does need bread, and the amount should be at least a kibetza. Krishna Brura later on said, you should have a kazayit, that is enough. Okay, discussion there precisely how much. The question now, which is very, very relevant, and it's becoming more and more common, is sometimes you have people who, there's once upon a time they were not as aware of this, or it was not as common for various reasons, but nowadays there are many people who do not eat bread, maybe for health reasons, maybe you have people who have celiac, who are gluten-free, right? And then there's a problem, it will cause a person great pain and distress and illness if the person is going to eat bread. What should you do then? Because that is how we define the meal. So we have very important siman here in the Shulchan Aruch, source number 19. It's on page 113. It says, Yesh omrim shadam shemezik lo achila, ve'az oneg hu lo, shelo le'echol lo yochal. We saw this before in the Rambam, where he says that we have 3 meals a day. A person's not able to eat it. Sometimes you have people who were used to eating very, very small quantities of food. And you tell them now, again, in those days, they will only eat 2 meals a day, you can tell them 3 meals. I can't do it. Not because, we have 17 quarters at each meal, but because that is what they're accustomed to, and they would not be able to. It would cause them harm. So then they would be exempt. That is what the Shulchan Aruch says here. A person is going to be harmed by eating. The whole point, why do we have to have 3 meals? It's for Oneg Shabbat. If by eating, by definition, is not going to cause you Oneg, it's going to cause you distress. So then there's no point. Then you should not eat in that way. And therefore, it seems clear that if eating a certain type of food is going to cause a person harm, it's not going to be Oneg, there would be no requirement to eat that food. We have another problem, however, which is going to be that if we say, and again, this comes up, there are, a very good, you can see in the footnotes here, there are some articles available online, or books that have been written in terms of Sidiak in Halakha, because it comes up in a number of places where we have the definition of food. The definition of a meal is bread over here by Shabbat, by Kiddush. We have by Sukkot, for example, by a person on Sukkot. When do we go and we say the bracha, L'Shem B'Sukkah, we have a fixed meal. We define a fixed meal as having had bread or one of the 5 grains. So a person who does not eat bread or 5 grains, they're never going to make a bracha, or they're never obligated to eat in the Sukkah. So there's an interesting discussion. But in terms of, so we said, okay, a person does not need to eat bread in terms of the obligation of the meal. But we know that we have another obligation of Kiddush Makom Suda. And how do we define Suda? We define it by fixed eating. Okay, so we've learned previously, I'm sure you all remember, that there is an opinion of the Geonim that said Kiddush Makom Suda applies when not just if I eat bread, but even if I drink wine. There was discussion of Ravit of wine. Does that mean the Ravit you drink to make Kiddush, or is it in addition to the Kiddush? We saw that there are situations where we could rely on it. So certainly if somebody is unable to eat bread, we could say that they could drink that little bit of wine, and that would suffice in terms of Kiddush Makom Suda. What if they can't drink wine as well? So again, there's a question here, conceptually, it does not appear in these sources, but it's interesting to think about, which is that if I have an individual who never eats these foods, and by definition, for that individual, my definition of the Suda would be with, I don't know, Adama or Eitz or whatever it is. Could I then say that there in that situation, that counts as Kvil Suda? It would seem logical to say yes. The problem with that would be that Chazal gave us an objective definition, and here we are making the definition subjective. Okay, so there's what to talk about. I'm just leaving that open as a point to think about. But certainly, the Halta V'Savata talks about how much bread we're going to be required to eat in order to say the Ketamazon. Yeah, but over there it's talking. There we learn out that pasuk is talking specifically the context of bread, the context of the Ketamazon, and how much, what is the amount, the quantity that one is required to eat. But either way, you can see.
Halta V'Savata means mostly from bread, and not everything else becomes a meal. That's
all we are. Right? Because the only bracha, it's the Halta V'Savata Barak. The only bracha which is of course not Torah is the Ketamazon. About the bread. The other brachot, the other brachot come later will expand by the Rabbanan. But that's the reference of the Rambam. In any event, there are other solutions as well. You'll see over here. Look on page 114. There's a quote in an article written by Rabbi Rimon relating to Choletzilia. He says, "My dinosha Choletzilia b'yachas l'chovat achilat lechem." It comes up by Pesach as well. Matzah, there's a separate issue also. He says, "L'chol ha'deot Sudot Shabbat bichlal, v'achilat lechem bifrat, kshur l'Oneg Shabbat." As we've said, the idea of the Sudot Shabbat, and specifically bread, is connected to Oneg Shabbat. Shem shemisha achilat bichlal mitza'elet oto patum shalosh sudot. Just as somebody who eating at all is going to be difficult for them, and not just difficult, but it's going to cause them suffering rather than causing them joy, so they would be exempt. If eating bread is harmful to that person, he can eat, he or she can eat other things. You say, well, obviously there are different levels in terms of the illness, and there are people who even the smallest amount is going to be very, very, very harmful to them. They should not eat. People for whom it's only if they eat a large quantity, and they can get by with it because I have bread. So then that is something else. But then he says in Zohar, yes, לציין שכיום ניתן להשיג קמח מטעם מיוחד שהוציאו ממנו בגלוטן. Apparently it is now possible to get a special type of wheat flour which has had gluten removed. זוהי בשורה גדולה לרבים מחולי הצליאק שיכולים לאכול בשבת חלות שברכתן המוציא בלא gluten. So it may be possible if there's if the reality is that you can get the food that satisfies all the halachic requirements as well, without causing that harm, then that should be relied upon. I remember a number of years ago, I heard from a very person dying in a certain community People asking us, was during the COVID pandemic, and people were asking all sorts of questions. We said, can you rely on this shit over the other? Can we rely on this? Can we rely on that? And he said, look, he said, if it's necessary, so halakha can find a way. But so many times, people jump for all these kudos. People jump to change halakha. Well, just look at the reality. It's not necessary. There's a solution. It's something else that can be done. So that's what should be done. We shouldn't all the time be looking automatically to define things as a Shabbat Chag. But actually, it's not a Shabbat Chag. Again, today we have technological solutions. We have other solutions for many, many, many different issues. So here's an example. If a person is saying, can we now define a Seudah without bread? But maybe you can get bread, it doesn't have gluten, if it's possible. Again, I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know. But if it's possible, it would obviously be preferable. If it's impossible, as we say, we'll find a way, find a solution. But we don't necessarily need to jump to it. Okay. We mentioned that there is a prohibition to fast on Shabbat. So this is included amongst a number of other issues which would impinge on one's Oneg Shabbat. Look at the Rambam in source number 21. Very interesting Rambam. It says, so a person's mood on Shabbat needs to be appropriate. It says one cannot fast. And again, generally speaking, when would one fast? If you look at the well-known Rambam in Hilchot, the Rambam in Hilchot talks about the fact where, again, the 5 fasts that we have, the communal fast today is only a minor part of that. But it was once upon a time, in days of yore, when the stress would happen the second time. Most of it talks about what happened when there was no rain, and they would declare fast on the tzibur. So there's no rain, or there's a war, or there's some other distress that's coming up, and people have to fast, and people cry out. And the Rambam explains that in such a situation, not only do you fast, but you cry out to Hashem, and you engage in introspection, and you realize, he says, if a person doesn't know, if a person thinks that everything that happens is just happenstance, but it's not because of what we've done and we don't have some responsibility, because that there is achzariyut. He says that is cruelty, very harsh language in the Rambam, and it's a critical one to read and to learn and in various contexts. But so related to that, he says all of that, but not on Shabbat. Right? We don't, in our tefillah as well, we know, we change the tefillah, the Shmoneh Esrei that we say during the week, for various reasons. We discussed Hilchot Shabbat previously, the previous Shirim on YouTube. We don't ask for our personal needs and Rachamim and Tachronim, etc. on Shabbat. Even when Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbat, right? Yom Kippur, part of the Tefillah, we say Avinu Malkeinu. We say in each of the Tefillah, Mincha, maybe yes, maybe not, different place, a different custom. But when Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbat, so we omit that. Ne'ilah is different. Ne'ilah we say Avinu Malkeinu even on Shabbat. But generally speaking, the Makesh Rachamim Shabbat we try and avoid. And he says the Rambam, why? Because all of us negate Oneg Shabbat. Even those type of distress for which one would generally fast, but it would not be on Shabbat, will be on Tovim. Okay. However, he says there are exceptions even to that. So very interesting. Says the Rambam that if there is an exceptional situation of immediate pikuach nefesh, essentially, so then even for that, one could cry out on Shabbat, right? And the obvious parallel is a little box here in blue talking about what happened. And back to Simchat Torah, right? And now, so we went. Nobody was crying out because we all went home. Because, I mean, the situation was just nobody had any idea what was going on. Right? But nowadays, this is why, based on this last part of this Rambam, is why in some schools in America, and I think they're still doing it. So Schechter came out. He said at the beginning of the war, he said that everybody should be saying Avinu Malkeinu, and he said you should say it during the week, and you should say it on Shabbat. He says there's no difference based on this idea. The same way that on Shabbat, Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbat, and we'd say Avinu Malkeinu et Ne'ilah. So too, he was saying, and I know there were shorts here that were saying it. Some would stop, or some may still carry on. But generally speaking, so that is an exceptional circumstance. So we're not going to say that Oneg Shabbat gets in the way of Pikuach Nefesh. And this is in a sense Pikuach Nefesh. But generally speaking, we don't want to do things which are the opposite of Oneg Shabbat, and included in that is that one should not be fasting on Shabbat, as we've already mentioned. There is fasting for the entire day, there is certainly prohibited. But even fasting through 6 hours, through midday, that also should be avoided. It says the Yerushalmi in source 22, Rabbi Achar, Rabbi Abau, Moshe Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Asur litanot at 6 shaot b'Shabbat. One should not be fasting until 6 hours, until Chatzot. One should start eating, as we've already seen, one should start eating their meal before Chatzot. At least one should have something to, when you have something to eat. You'll see the Shulchan Aruch. The answer number 24. He says, Asur litanot b'Shabbat at 6 shaot. V'afilu lomedu mitpalel asur. Okay? So the question then becomes, if the person is in a place where they know that they're going to go davening, particularly if it starts later, it's going to go on for very, very long, right? What should one do? So it could be that in such a situation, it's better to have some water or have some maybe tea or coffee at home before one goes to shul, in order that one is not considered to be fasting. There is a discussion whether drinking tea or coffee or hot water is generally speaking, we're not allowed to eat before davening. Certain things one could. Certain situations, to drink water, that would be permitted. So if it's permitted to drink it before davening anyway, is that enough to relieve you of the fact that you went fasting because it's not considered significant enough eating or not? The discussion over here in the footnotes. The one case where the poskim do allow one to fast on Shabbat is the Tanit Chalom. Again, not so common nowadays. The Hilchot Yosef talks about in source number 24. That person has a bad dream. And of course, the person was stressed, and they're going to fast as a way of atonement for that. So it's brought out that in such a situation that really it's going to cause him more. It's going to cause the person more distress if they are not able to fast, and therefore they're able to get out of fast. But nonetheless, you were meant to fast on Shabbat in the first place. So there will permit you to fast the Tanit Chalom, but the following day you have to fast again over the fact that you fasted on Shabbat. You would actually have to fast twice. That is it's called the Metav Tanit Tanito, right? To fast in order to atone for your fast. That is that concept over there. All right. Let's talk maybe about one more point, and that will close for today. Talking about, and we have mentioned this in passing previously, but we'll see it again. This is the concept of Lechem Mishnah. We know in each of the 3 meals, certainly of the first 2, right? One is required to have Lechem Mishnah with double loaves. That is based on the fact that when the man fell, there were 2 double portion fell in honor of Shabbat, before Shabbat, and therefore we have the 2 loaves which we begin our meal with. There is quite an elaborate discussion based on the Gemara and the Rishonim as to when one begins to cut the loaves or to break the loaves, which one should one cut? You'll remember from Pesach, the Seder, wasn't that long ago, right? So there's a big discussion over there. There we have 3 matzahs instead of 2, and the question is when we, one of the reason why we have 3 instead of 2, because it's not clear which one we're actually saying the bracha on. We're meant to have the 2 full loaves, the Lechem Mishnah, as we do every Shabbat in Yom Tov. However, on Pesach, we need to have a broken matzah because it's lechem oneg, it's ferment bread, right? So then when we say the brachot, it's not clear which bracha it's relating to. We say, what's the lechem na'aretz? Which relates to the lechem mishnah, so that's the full one. We say, anachilat matzah relates to the broken one, and therefore you actually have to break from the top 2 matzot and try and eat a kavayit of each. Over here, a regular Shabbat, it's a bit simpler than that. We just have 2 loaves. So there are some who say in the Gemara, there are some who say you have to break off from both. And the same way, some who say just from one. I think generally acceptable that we just cut one of the loaves. Which one do we have to? So surprisingly, normally we would say you take from one on top, right? The one that's closer to you. But over here we see this is one of those rare cases. Interesting. Brought from the Kabbalah, the Ashkenazim are actually more makbid to follow the Kabbalah than the Sfarad. This is one of those cases. So have a look at page 120. You'll see the Beit Yosef. And he quotes from the Kolbo, who says, Katav HaKolbo b'Siman Kaf Daled, yesh nogim b'Tzad Tachton, v'lo ha'elyon. It's surprising that you would break you cut the bottom loaf of challah rather than the top. V'ein nogim b'Tzad Elyon, and Kamish no, says the Kolbo. There are those who say that, but that's not Amunai. Says the Beit Yosef, I've seen the men I bet, yes, you do take from the bottom one. V'shamati sheken nachon nasot al pi HaKabbalah. And I've heard that this is correct according to Kabbalah. This is the way that it must be done. Now says the Ba in source number 34. He says, hang on a second. I don't understand. Heach Yovlina al Dina Talmud, Ein Mavlin al Mitzvot. Says Kabbalah is very nice, but we have an halacha that says Ein Mavlin al Mitzvot. You don't pass over a mitzvah that comes your way. So you have the bread which is closer to you. You're going to leave that one aside to cut on the bottom one. That would be inappropriate. So it says the Taz, who is the son-in-law of the Bach. He says, I'll answer the question. He says, אני נהגתי בעצמי כשמלכים על התחתונה. מניח אני אותה קרוב אליי יותר מהעליונה. Right, so it's the bottom loaf, but it's a little bit closer to us, and therefore that one comes first. Okay. Aruch HaShulchan says the question doesn't actually begin. He says, yes, mi shomer, de'en ma'avrin al mitzvot lo shayach, ela k'sheroteh la'asot shtehem. He says, what is ein ma'avrin al mitzvot? When you've got two in front of you, and you want to do both, so you pass over that one to get to the other. So, for example, when we have where do we find this expression, man, every morning, when we daven talit and tefillin, right? That a person has to have it in such a way, we put on our talit first before the tefillin. So in the case, it needs to be that the talit is closer to you, so that you don't pass over the tefillin in order to get to the talit. Same thing, when you open up the bag of the tefillin, you need to get to the shal yad first before the sharosh. If you have certain types of bags or certain types of cases where it's constructed in such a way, and if you reach the sharosh first, it's got from the poskim. Maybe you should put on the sharosh first, so as not to be ma'avirin ala mitzvah. But there, you're going to have both of them. So that why would be, it would be disparaging to pass over this one, go to that one first, then come back to it. But if you're not going to have both of them in any event, says the Aruch HaShulchan, then maybe it's not a concern. Right? You might say, he doesn't say, yeah, but you might say, what do you mean, ein ma'avrin ala mitzvot? It's not a mitzvah. I'm making a bracha, and I'm choosing which food to eat. I want to eat this food, or I want to eat that food. Okay. But whatever it is, the Shmirat Shabbat Hilchot says at the end of the day, we are concerned for this idea of the Bach and the Taz, and therefore, ideally, what we should do is we should hold the bottom color closest to us so that we can have that one first. Again, he points out what the Ramah says, that this only applies to Friday night. This does not apply to Shabbat day or Sudah Shlishit or Yom Tov. Right, coming up to Shavuot, that's the next Yom Tov. On Shavuot night, also you will take from the top. Chazon of Rabbi Yosef, he says, Rabbi Source number 38, יש נוהגים לפצוע מן הכיכר העליון, ויש נוהגים לפצוע מן הכיכר התחתון, now question. Amazing. So he says everybody, there are different customs. Everybody does what they do. Like I said, it's surprising that the Ashkenazim are much more makbid on this, and the reason is from Kabbalah. But nonetheless, that's what it says. Okay, we'll cut it there we'll end there for today. No pun intended. There are a few other interesting halachot of Lech and Mishnah. Next week we'll pick it up with that. The question which comes up: sometimes you only have one roll, one challah which is available, and you have another one that's in the freezer. So it's in the freezer, so it's frozen, which means you can't eat it. Can you use that? Is that appropriate? I know people who have the same roll, like a Mishnah in the freezer, from Pesach to Pesach. Okay, Pesach you feel good, but for 6 months, you keep this, or a year, you keep this roll in the freezer, and that's my Mishnah, and that way I don't have. Is that appropriate? Is that possible? Should one do that? So we'll look at that next week. A few other discussions related to Oneg Shabbat as well. We mentioned it's not just food. What about Limud Torah? What about sleeping? And the famous acronym of Shabbat is Shena b'Shabbat Ta'anug. Everybody knows that. Every Yeshiva knows that, right? Is that we'll talk about that in Sudah Shlishit as well. All of that, Bezrat Hashem, will be next week.